This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by Porcelanosa. With 30 showrooms in the United States and Canada, Porcelanosa is a luxury lifestyle brand that'll make your next project's dream into a reality. From a wide selection of tiles and mosaics to modern bathroom and kitchen cabinetry designs, Porcelanosa makes it easy to bring modern European design elements into your home. Visit porcelanosa-usa.com to learn more. You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. Doug and Steve are architects, and they're here to help you design your dream home. So today we have the pleasure of talking to one of my current clients. Now, we haven't had any clients on the show as of yet. Steven's been very interested in getting some on the show, so this is going to be great. And what I think is really wonderful about this is our listeners are just like you. And so they're looking for really good information in terms of, what you go through when you're doing a renovation or an addition project. So Vicki Craver, it's awesome to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So let me tell our listeners a little bit about how we met and what we've been doing, and then we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts things. So back in, now this is amazing, back in late 2016, if you can believe it, you and I met at your house with Diana Byrne, and I had gotten a call from Diana, and she said, "Hey, I've got a friend who is thinking about a little bit of work in her house." Specifically, it was a door in the library, right? That was what we were looking at. So I came over and we talked for about 45 minutes or so, and I have been, you have been my client. We've been working together for 2.5 years now, renovating your home.
That is crazy.
It's unbelievable. So early 2016 was when we first met. Unbelievable. So let me give Vicki's background here a little bit, because she's a very busy person. It's great that she was able to take some time out of her day to sit with us. So Vicki is the current chair of the board of directors at Horizons National. She's also on the board of advisors at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. She was the former vice chair on the board of directors for Fairfield County's Community Foundation, and she serves as a trustee on the board of Greenwich Country Day School. Previously, she was a vice president on the corporate bond trading desk at Goldman Sachs in New York City. She is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Vicki lives in Riverside, Connecticut with her husband and their lovely 3 daughters. So again, welcome, Vicki. It's great to have you. When we talked by email earlier in the week, I asked you to think about 3 things that you might want to share with our listeners about the renovation process, which you're currently still going through. But before we get into that, the show's called Design Your Dream Home, and I know our listeners love to hear about what it's like to work with architects or what it's like not to work with architects. And I know we talked when the job first started, and you told me that you guys had worked with an architect on the design of your current home, and I was wondering what kind of experience that was, and if you guys had ever worked with a design professional before you guys worked on this home.
Yeah, sure. So the first time I worked with a design professional was when we came into a spec house that was being framed. And so that spec house, it didn't really have an architect. It was a builder, architect situation. And we came in and hired a designer. And so it allowed us to tweak some things about the home as it was being built. And so that was my first experience with a design professional but it didn't, as I said, really involve the architect piece of it so much. And then we our next project was our current home.
Oh, wow.
And we bought a house that we really loved and decided we would renovate it, and hired a team and hired an architect that loved older homes and that really saw the value and beauty that we saw in the house, which was like a 1920-ish.
Awesome.
Is it a Georgian or a colonial? You know better than I do, Doug. But pretty traditional home.
Yep.
And as we started to look at what needed to be done and what we wanted to do, it became clear that this was not going to be a renovation. This was going to be a tear down.
Wow.
So what we did at that point was say, what were the things that made us fall in love with the house? And what do we want to keep? And what do we want to recreate in the new version? So that was sort of the basis for how we got here. So that was a lot of, it was mainly architect work for a long time, going to their offices and meeting them on site as well. So that was an interesting process. And that's where I first was learning anything at all about this idea that there are things that are right and wrong in the world of architecture, which I'm basically a rule follower type person. So I paid a lot of attention to those. I wasn't very excited to do the wrong thing. And so, but that was a lot of fun. And one of the things that was pointed out to us was over the years, what the additions to the original house, where they had been right and wrong, at least in this opinion. So anyway, that was a great learning experience. And I'm really glad I didn't walk into that not having had some experience with the construction and finishing of the previous house, the spec house that we had finished. Because I think I would have just been completely overwhelmed and not understood what was coming my way.
Yeah, that sounds so neat.
Yeah. And then I got really, really lucky because the builder that we hired, the super on the job, also had been an architect. So he had worked as an architect. Then he had worked for the builder in a role as super on the site. And now he's back in the world of architecture again. But to have really very knowledgeable people on the job, and as a client, to have some disagreement happen was really valuable for me, because to have two different opinions and we all had to sort of work it out. And again, back to this notion of what's right. Well, you can do a lot of things within the realm of what's right. So anyway, that was, I benefited from that greatly. So the more that they disagreed and talked, the better for me. Which, Doug, as you know, on our current job, we have a similar situation. We have you as the architect, but we have very knowledgeable people all around the table. And the lines are a little bit blurred, I think, sometimes about, whose role what is. And I don't know how you feel about it, but as a client, it's great. It's really great, because to have that discussion instead of just having one person say it and then the next person, not have anything to do with that decision, but talk about the other decision, that's not nearly as fun. So we sort of have to wrestle with it all. So
be more specific about that whatever discussion you're talking about. So what would be a typical issue that, I don't know, Doug might bring up, and what would the other person say, or what would be a typical issue?
Well, for instance, Doug mentioned that the genesis of our relationship was about a door and a library, which is a funny thing to think about now. I'm pretty sure we've touched every room in the house at this point. But it was a very traditional library. It was dark, and this is an otherwise light-filled house. And so to think about how to take a room that is, wood paneling and it had plenty of windows and doors, but it just seemed to be dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the charge. How do we lighten up this space? And what we did is, on this very traditional library, put a completely modern all glass sliding door to take advantage of the views and let in as much light as possible. So that was, it's a really good departure from the whole rest of the house. It was the first modern element we introduced in this totally traditional home, I think, Doug.
Yeah.
And so that came with, well, where does it end? And so to have the designer and the architect and the building team all standing in the library and thinking about, well, if we're going to take out this door and window, what does that do to the bookcase next to it? And I mean, the snowball starts there. Like, you just really get going. So some of it was about the boundaries of the actual project. And some of it was about, well, if we have a really modern door and we have an architect that's going to draw all those details, then we also need to marry it to the traditional cabinetry that's in the room. And then, with the designer and the floor and it just everything. How far were we going to go?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think there has been a ton of collaboration in the project, which isn't always the way these projects go. So sometimes I would say many times, the client really drives that. What are the roles of each professional, and what do they want the roles of each professional to be? So I think in this case, I'm very comfortable collaborating in terms of the design work. It just doesn't bother me at all. And in fact, I believe that all the other people sitting there have really, not only do they have strong opinions, but they have good opinions, that they're educated opinions. You talked about right and wrong. So our listeners, interestingly, may think, well, is there a right and wrong thing about design? And I think what we're talking about here more is historically what is correct, what is right and wrong. And so when we talk about putting modern elements in traditional spaces, how do you marry the two? That's been really fun. And it's also been quite challenging because, as you said, where does it stop? So it's been great having all these different players and being able to trust them and listen to them and value their opinions. It's worked out really well.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that for you guys, I've had this thought sometimes when we're all standing in the room together and debating something, that it might be nice that you guys get to banter with each other, only because you don't have to say to me, you absolutely have to money this, or the whole thing is just going to be a waste of time and effort. And that's can be a hard thing to say. But if you can say to the designer, don't you think
Right.
we should consider this? It's just a softer approach, and it makes it makes the conversation easier. So I think there's a lot of benefit to how it all works, and it gives me some time to stand there and absorb it and listen to the pros and cons, not because you guys arrive with a PowerPoint presentation and walk me through it, but because it's just the conversation that's happening. And then even more fun for me is, there are words I don't understand and there are points of view, and I don't know, Doug is fun with the vocabulary. So, we had a string there of meetings where you could get points for using these esoteric terms that, but that makes even going through a punch list fun. Like it's just an entertaining way to do it, to have a great team.
Well, it's been great, but I will say to our listeners that it's not typical. That is, you will likely get an architect that has a bigger ego and doesn't want to listen to other opinions. He or she will be right regardless. And that, that's the downside, I think, or the challenges with what people think about architects. Many times those stereotypes are correct, but in this case, it's been a collaborative experience, which has been great. It's made the project better.
You know what I found, because it's interesting and it sounds like it's all working great for you guys, is that the architect usually is driving the design, and I personally find it can be problematic if the builder is able to talk to client and then offer conflicting advice. I don't mind if we're together and talking about things, but sometimes this is where it gets kind of confused and suddenly there's too many designers. So again, it sounds like you have a great relationship, but it can be sometimes difficult. I found in my own kind of work. I like having a great relationship with the builder who, I mean, I'm drawing, he's building, so I trust when he says, "Hey, what if we think about doing it this way?" But the vision is not being changed. It's more like, if we want to achieve this, because we've all agreed through the design process, this is kind of what we're looking for. How can we best achieve that? I like those conversations. I don't love when it's like, hey, what do you think, instead of doing what he drew, we do this? It happens.
Yeah,
It's
not quite like that in this case, but
no, but it can be an issue.
I
So
know.
I think it's something to just sort of think about. And Doug is right. I think that I'm less collaborative than Doug, but I'm not bad. I think some architects would have a real issue with a builder that maybe they brought to the table, offering other design advice. I think it would be a real problem, especially for commercial projects or bigger projects. I don't think that, if they're doing a skyscraper and it's some famous architect, and then the guy says, well, what if we, instead of doing that, why don't we do this? I don't think he's going to be like, Daniel Levens is not going to be very happy about that. So
probably not going to happen.
But with a home, it's a little different, I think. And also, you have the home there and you're walking in the space, and I think it's easy to offer not conflicting, different ideas and talk about them. It's a little different than when it's on paper and we're sort of talking. And I think I never like when a builder says, "Here, can I have your sketchbook?" No, don't draw. Don't draw my sketchbook. You bring your own sketchbook. And
well, one of the to your point there, one of the things that happens is because it's a renovation and we're living here,
and have lived there the entire time,
right? And I am essentially now married to the super. Like
right.
we,
right.
Every morning we start the day with and it's not because we have official meetings. It's because I'm in the kitchen and he's in the kitchen.
Right.
So, but that means that there's a lot of opportunity for the builder to have opinions when Doug is not here.
Right.
And, happily for our team, it's something, it's not really been an issue. I have in other projects definitely had more of that happen where there's, I like the arguments to happen when everybody's all in the room, and argument's a strong word, but it's a debate.
Yeah.
And you can't have the debate when there's somebody missing that can't offer the other side of the equation. So, but I can imagine that, sometimes a builder might weigh in on that just because it's easier for them to build it. And want to change how something's done or made because it's simpler. And that's a real risk, right? Like and so what you need is the balance, and you need everybody in the room for those discussions.
I agree with that. There's another example, and this has happened to me where I've sort of maybe stepped on someone's toes, where you have a contractor kind of running the job, and then the plumber comes to me and says, "Hey, Stephen, what if we do this?" Then the head contractor says, "Please don't talk to my subcontractors. You don't have to be rude to them, but don't short circuit the design decision-making process." And I think that happens as well, where it could be the homeowner or the architect, but maybe a subcontractor thinks that he knows a better way to do something, but really the chain of command should go, he should talk to his job supervisor, and then the job supervisor can talk to me, and we can talk about it with owner. I think there does need to be this kind of clear chain of command. Otherwise it gets confused and a mess. I mean, now the plumber's doing his own thing, and the builder's like, "What's happening? Why is he doing that?" It's like, it's not on the drawings. "Oh, I talked to him. Please don't talk to my plumber." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." So
yeah, that's not happening either. But yes, it's a good
friendly. I don't mind. You can talk to me. I'll talk to the plumber.
So great. I'm getting all defensive.
That's not happening as far as Doug knows. Yep.
As far as Doug knows, I love it.
Can I ask another question? You don't have to get into specifics, but because this is a project where it sounds like it wasn't like you had, this is my scope. It's more like, let's do something there. And we need to, oh, now we have to do this over here. How do you know what the budget is? How do you convey to design professionals, builders, this is how much we want to spend, or how much will this cost, or how do you, or even their fees? Like, how do you know, Doug, how should we pay you? Like, how do you sort of figure for all of this when it's this kind of project?
Well, so I'm going to break that into two parts, but one part is just in general about the fees and the budgeting and how all that works. Now that I've worked on a couple of different projects, there's been a beach house in the mix also. So, and that was a whole different team, same designer as now, but everyone else on the team was different. And so in every instance, there have been slightly different ways that I've been billed or that fees have been applied. So I would just encourage, any homeowner you just have to ask, because there are different ways that people do it. And, I remember in the beginning, Doug, that we had just a brief discussion about whether the contractor would be going to you and then to me, or just to both of us, or exactly how that worked. So I'd say in this case, there's not a right and a wrong.
Right.
But so you just need to define it so that you're not surprised, and that it works for everybody. But as in terms of this project and how it evolved, I will say evolved rather than use project creep. But really what happened was we got just more comfortable and excited with this shift to a modern look. So if we were going to be building the house today, as much as we loved that original house that was here, we probably would have gone much more modern in the architecture of the house. But
Good job, Doug.
But 10 years ago, that's not we started the project even longer than that, but we moved in 10 years ago. So that's just not where we were. So to start in the one room and say, oh, look what this modern version of a door did for this room, and look how cleaned up it made the space and brighter. And hey, since we did that there and it worked, we could think about it here. And then it just over time said, well, in each room, there were improvements that could be made, but still have it feel like our house. And again, having done enough work in this realm, I know that doors and windows are ridiculous in the price scheme of things. And so just having in, I was aware sort of the scale that we might be undertaking, which I think helped. Because to have the price tag come after you've fallen in love with an idea and then have the price tag be prohibitive is a problem. So we were picking and choosing where we didn't do all the doors and windows, but we picked out some key ones and integrated those. There have been some items where we pushed back, but I'd say overall that because it wasn't an all-in-one package, that it was room by room, that's been the great and terrible thing. It's spread the cost out, over since 2016, as Doug pointed out. But it's also meant that I've, been living with a little bit of construction off and on for most of that time. So had we said, here are all the things we're going to do, and here's the whole price tag, I wouldn't have said yes to that. I would have said, I just built this house 10 years ago. But instead, every time that we addressed a room or made a change, there was validation. There was, I'm so glad we did that. It was so worth it. And then we would say, oh, so maybe that other thing that you mentioned that I wasn't ready to think about, I'm ready to think about it. So that, for in some ways has made it harder and longer, but it's meant that we've been willing to do more. And again, along the way, I've had a better sense every time of now I can say, oh my God, you're talking about curved glass. Well, I know what that means for lead time and budget. So I'm going to say no right there, or I'm going to say, yes, it's worth it, so that's
So
sort of how
do
we've
you
got it.
think that this experience then gave you the confidence to go ahead with this new beach house, right? So do you think that all the years of working on this project just giving you a feeling for all of it, then you could undertake that, ground up, we'll do everything?
Well, the beach house was a renovation that
Oh,
happened
okay,
before
okay,
this.
okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
So the beach house, because it was a beach house and it was, uh, not a primary residence, Diana Byrne, the designer, had a modern, feel that she was interested in. And I was like, this is great. So my sisters and I have this house together, and we were like, let's do it. Take a risk, like go
Got it.
crazy, and that was, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I like my beach house better where I live all the time because it's like cool. And so
Interesting.
that was, how can we incorporate that where we are now? So I would say the beach house gave me the confidence to do this version.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh, okay.
Well, already a ton of really good information from people. So this has been great. So we had talked about these three things, or are there things that have been on your mind of late, or things that, as we've gone along in this process, have been new to you or interesting, or you'd say, gosh, if you had a friend who was starting a project, you'd talk to them about these specific things?
Yeah, so I'll tell you my three things. One is, and this is what we've really already talked a lot about, but that's, I've tried to hire the team and trust the team. And so when Diana says, I've been working with this great architect, then, I trust that. And I would rather say they've worked together well before. And that's very important. And then when they have also both worked with the contractor well before, then, so this is a different contractor than originally built the house for us. And I had a lovely relationship with that contractor. And I know that can be unusual, but I didn't have a problem. I just know that people that are already, comfortable working together, it's going to work better for me. So I think that's important, that you think about the whole team. You might have three of the most awesome people that you'd like to bring to the table, but if they've never worked together, then maybe it's great, maybe it's not. So I think it's just something to be aware of.
Well, and just to jump in here, that's very different than many projects, the beginning of many projects. That is, you have somebody who designs a building for you, and then the client will say, well, let's get the best price. And that's really the focus. And so you bid it out to 3 people or 4 people, and you get the best number, and you say, okay, well, the lowest number isn't the one I'm going to pick, but I'll pick the next one up. And so you're not really thinking about how does anybody work with anybody. What I tell most of our clients, and I think I've told you this, when we design something, even in schematic design, we like to bring in a contractor, or we like to meet a few of them and then bring one in and hire them then, and start working with them, so that when you get to construction documents and then construction, the pricing phase and construction, final pricing phase of construction, you've gotten to know them, and or you have a really strong sense that you're going to work well with them. So it's counterintuitive for most people, because most people are really looking at this from the dollar sign point of view. And it's a mature way of looking at this, is saying, okay, how does everybody work together? What a great a way of thinking about the process.
Well, but I also think that, as far as the pricing and the cost, one of the things, and this is back from the spec house project, the price is not the price. And, trying to, go with something that seems cheaper can frequently backfire. So
Right.
not always, there's certainly ways to find value. But it doesn't mean, the lowest price there is probably a reason, and you need to understand what the difference is.
Right. Absolutely. Great point.
And so another one of my recommendations would be to be willing to disagree, because I definitely know the least of the people in the room, but I'm the one that's going to live in the house. So while it can be intimidating I don't feel this way now. So Doug, I hope you don't ever think I'm intimidated now, because that would be silly. But, but in general, I don't, and there are times when I feel like I can envision what we're talking about, and times that I can't, and times that, again, back to the vocabulary, that I know the words, and times that I don't. But it is going to be me at the end of the day. And one of these days, all these people won't show up at my house anymore and be part of it. So, and I'll be living in it. So just be willing to disagree, be willing to push back, whether it's price, whether it's, the effect that you're looking for, or what you're trying to accomplish, whether, it's how you think you're going to use that room. Things that are obvious to some people and how they work may not be obvious to you, but it's worth asking the questions and understanding all of it, so that, because, obviously you don't want to be going back and redoing things.
Right.
So.
I think this is a really good point, that not only to disagree, but also just to say you don't quite understand, or you don't feel it. Meaning, let's say I present a plan, an elevation, I kind of think, oh, I can put it together in my head. I know what it is. And maybe if this is the first time, you really can't envision the space. And I think it's okay to say, I don't quite feel the space. Is there another way for you to illustrate it? Or I don't know, maybe it's a model or it's a rendering, but we have the tools. I think it's okay to say, hey, I just don't quite feel this one or understand this one. Can you, make a drawing so that I can better understand or simulate this space and what it'll feel like? So I think definitely people have to say this, because we don't want it to start to be built and you think, well, oh my God, this is not at all what I envisioned. I don't want to hear that at all. So I want to make sure that people are not nodding their head like, that I understand, and then when I'm building it, they're not happy. And I just, I think that's a really important, that sometimes we just think, oh, here's a plan, it'll be 9 feet high, and you say, okay, we get it, but maybe you don't feel that. You say, oh, that's so low, or I don't know. Maybe you just have a different impression just because you're not used to using the drawings the way we are. So, Doug, when you do your drawings for for Vicki, what kind of drawings are they? Are they elevations and plans? Can she read them now because she's done this for so many times, or is it?
That's a really good question. Most of the drawings I send out are not details. So most of the drawings I'll send out are plans and elevations, although I do send out details more and more so as we've gone along in the process, because I believe Vicki does understand what we're looking at. In fact, one of the reasons the process works so well is I'll put together, we'll talk about a change, or we'll talk about a change as a renovation. And I will explore a few options. We may discuss them in the field, and then I'll go with one of them, and then I'll end up doing a detail and a couple elevations of the thing, and I send those drawings out to everybody on the team, and everybody reviews them, I hope. And this past example, Vicki saw a detail and said, what, I'm not quite sure that's what I'm looking for. I would rather this, or I would rather something other than that. And that has been wonderful, because then I think it's been great, because it really pushes me, even though I do spend a lot of time on design and making things the way I really think they're going to be best. I think they get better. I was going to mention Diana and I, when we first started working on the project, I was working on the office upstairs adjacent to the master bedroom, and we replaced all of this existing very traditional millwork with some very contemporary stuff, and that's a great interior elevation. There's one big window, and all the millwork's along one side, and I put together these very contemporary details and elevations, and I sent it off to Diana. She said, and she actually said this, she said, I like this, but I think it can be better, and here's what I'm thinking. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never really thought about that, or I wasn't really certain that's what Vicki was looking for. Let me put together some more drawings. And I did. And it's way better now than it would have been if Diana hadn't pushed back. So, you know, in both cases, it's been really good that everybody can read drawings and look at them, but then everybody can be really honest about how they feel in terms of the design aesthetic. And it doesn't bother me at all because I think we always get a better product in the end. We have across the board done that. So.
Yeah, it's and that's it's in every place. It's been more fun, you know, again, to have those discussions. Some of those, there are lots of discussions happily that don't involve me as well.
Right.
You know, and it sounds like that is probably one of them, but you know, and also as far as what drawings Doug shows me when he gets to the really nitty gritty and he has to, you know, do the cross section of how this meets that, then I may or may not be copied on the emails that have those drawings, but that part
Right.
I don't need that in my life.
Yeah, and we only copy her when we know that she still has a role to play. That you know, it hasn't been, if it hasn't been approved, there's still a question in our mind about something. She will get copied on it so that she gets to look at it and say, "Oh, that's not what I was thinking." Other than, you know, once you get into nitty gritty and the building stuff, and you know, everything just goes right to the GC.
Yeah.
I would also say that it's okay to ask for some options. Sometimes, even if it looks right, it's nice to see another option. And I mean, if the architect or designer is not strong enough to have other ideas, then you kind of maybe you need to look elsewhere because really it's not very hard for me to generate. It's paper, so I can generate 3 or 4 different ideas based on the, you know, let's say a overall concept, and then within that there's variations. It's like chess. You can kind of, there's different ways to move. And then I think sometimes you're like, okay, I feel good about the first choice. I just wanted to kind of make sure, and that's fine. I mean, this is, let's, before we build it, let's draw it through and feel confident and feel good about the decisions.
Right.
And so don't be afraid to ask your designer to, hey, I'm not sure. Can you, a couple of other alternatives just to kind of look, and that's, you should feel comfortable doing that.
Yep.
Well, this is where I'm spoiled because I thought that everybody did
Not 20
that because
times.
that's always what I've gotten. I've always gotten 3 or 4 options, you know, to choose from. And you're exactly right. It gives me, first of all, confidence, and also just, again, I don't know how to think about it. So to have, you know, here are some choices, and then from there, you know, choosing the option may mean 3 or 4 more options. That as we tweak it, but
Right.
but I think that's, yeah, I think that's really important.
Awesome. So that was 2, right? I mean, that's more than 2. That was like 2 A, B, C, D, but you can do
Right.
So the third one, that, and this is, if you're not going to do this, maybe don't bother with the whole project, but I'd say you just really have, it should be fun. It should be something you're choosing to do. It should be with people that you enjoy spending time with, and that you have to be able to laugh. I mean, there are going to be delays. There are going to be, you know, the scope of work will change. It will probably get bigger as you go. And based on my own experience, you may have a man walk in when you're naked in your bathroom. You know, all of these things may take place. So if you cannot keep your sense of humor, it's really going to be difficult to live through it.
I'm not even gonna ask what
the morning that happened was so funny. I mean,
it was
just,
not Doug. I will say,
let's there at the island, and she had this little smile on her face, and maybe Diana knew, maybe she didn't. I don't know. And then no, she didn't. She didn't know the whole story, and I was like, What's going on? And then you told us, like, oh
my God. The poor guy. Like, I think he did not stay on the job more than 1 more week. I think he may have asked to please go work on a different job because he just couldn't bear the thought of looking at me anymore.
Oh my gosh.
This is a really good point, though, about having a comfort level. I mean, let's say that someone gives you references for an architect, and this one, oh, look at, he's done all these big houses, or they're famous, or what have you, and you meet, and you're not connecting. And despite the fact that someone might have all these credentials, if you don't connect well and feel comfortable talking back and forth, then it doesn't probably work. It's not going to work. I mean, you're going to be together for, could be 2 years or 10 years or however many years. And you have to feel like this is somebody I can trust and feel good about and comfortable, and I can call and not feel, I don't know, intimidated or whatever that you would feel. You really can't have these things. It really has to be a good back and forth. And it's more important than, again, the credentials, or it's really the relationship, and you have to have that comfort level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Vicki, this has been, I think our listeners are going to love this. I mean, this is just lots of.
Yeah, they've been asking.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, this has been really great. So we really appreciate your time, Vicki.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. And Doug, I don't know when our next meeting is, but I bet we have one coming up.
I think we're there on Wednesday, actually.
Perfect.
So be there very soon.
Thank you very much, Vicki.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. If you have any questions or want to give us any feedback on the show, feel free to reach us through our website at thedougandsteveshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.